choose for yourself. To not outsource your thinking, but to give your thinking over to the source of thinking itself. Welcome back to another reflection and episode on the Daily Vedantic. Today's reflection is on one of the 3 daily practices. Within the philosophy of Vedanta, the 3 daily practices, there are philosophical practices that would be Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, which means listening, reflecting, then experiencing through meditation. But the 3 daily practices outside of the philosophical practices of listening, reflecting, and then experiencing, the 3 daily practices that Swami will talk about often at the ashram is you've got to question everything. Questioning. Then not taking anything for granted. Don't take anything for granted. And then study and reflect daily. Some nuance there beyond just kind of the philosophical practices within the daily practices where it's question everything. Question, which for most people starts with questioning the external world. But really the real meat of that is in the questioning the internal dialogue, the internal thoughts, all the things we're certain of, that we feel absolutely certain they're the case. And then, I don't know, maybe through experience in life, you've realized sometimes I thought things were certain and they weren't. This is that kind of questioning. Maybe some of the other things that I think are certain aren't so. The second daily practice is to not take anything for granted. Not taking anything for granted is similar to radical gratitude. Not taking anything for granted certainly applies to the things hidden in plain sight that we might take for granted, like our health, our relationships, our ability to serve those around us. But it also has a meaning of not taking anything for granted, maybe in the more British sense of the word of if someone says something and you hear it 1,000 times, don't just take it as granted truth. We're told these things like a great career will make you happy. And if you go to a good college, it'll help you with a fulfilling life. Or if you have children, like you might have just heard one of my daughters in the background. And that's, the sweetness of life is having little children and just going along with the herd mentality. I'm just saying, okay, well, everybody else says this, so it must be a granted truth. That's also taking something for granted without sufficiently thinking it through yourself. As I've heard it said, if you have your father's philosophy, you're not a philosopher. In other words, if you're just regurgitating what a prior generation has said, if you're just regurgitating what a teacher has said, you have not cultivated, one, the ability to truly question, is that truth? To question your own articulation of it, to question your own experience, to question, is this true for me? Is this true for the world? Do I really understand this, or am I just reciting it, regurgitating it? If you have your father's philosophy word for word, what are the chances it's your philosophy? The herd mentality is talked about often within Vedanta of so often we outsource our thinking to what the masses are doing. But there's that old adage, if you find yourself on the side of the majority, there's that old Mark Twain adage that if you ever find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and reflect. So appropriate to when we're just taking paths in life for granted. Taking decisions for granted, taking situations, circumstance for granted. And this dovetails into that herd mentality that we can so easily slip into. So easily and so often that we have no clue that we've just fallen in line. Taken these grand, quote unquote, certainties as granted truths instead of questioning them and not taking anything for granted. It's a slight tweak on that second daily practice of not taking anything for granted. But it's one that complements the first one quite nicely, of questioning everything, and one that rounds out gratitude to go beyond things on a list and enter new territory of gratitude for the ability to discern for yourself, choose for yourself, to not outsource your thinking, but to give your thinking over to source, the source of thinking itself. To be original, to not outsource your thinking, but to tap into your ability to think. That quality to think for oneself that is so often taken for granted. That is today's reflection on the Daily Vedantic, and we'll see you next time.